I'll do it, yep, because I'm here anyway, so. Okay, good morning. Welcome to the Friday, May 30th Educational Committee meeting. We are here to discuss curriculum changes, cycles coming up in the next year, and that's all Justin, so I'm just gonna turn the meeting over to him.
All right, sounds good. So you'll see the first item on the agenda for today is Acadian's reading and math assessment proposal. So what we're seeking out here today is we're seeking out your approval to do reading and math assessments for grades K through 5. Right now, and I know we had talked about this previously, there's entire state systems that are building prisons based upon their third grade children's ability to read. And that stands out to me. And in my first few months here, I've talked with a lot of teachers, and a lot of teachers are telling me, in their just talking with principals, we have no assessment for K through 2 in the area of reading. So if there's states that are really wise to this and have understood that, reading, especially in the early grades, is really important, especially to prevent long-term outcomes, building prisons, that sort of thing. I think that's important for us. Right now, we do Acadians for math at our elementary school level, but we're using an assessment called MAP. If you look at the next sheet, I think it's right under your agenda, why we should consider Acadians. The biggest thing that stands out with Acadians, and Acadians, I've used it in previous schools. A lot of school districts did, and I wrote on there, and I apologize, I wrote MTSS on there without explaining. I do my best to not put acronyms without explanation, so I'll explain it verbally. MTSS stands for a multi-tiered system of support. And what that means is that with your core program, so we just adopted, with board's approval, we adopted the new reading curriculum. And with a good core program, the research out there shows if your core is very solid, 80% of your kids should be on track and on level where they should be. But that also means that about 20% will need additional support, right? And so I think the goal here is if we can really build out those support systems for kids, that's where we want to be with evidence-based interventions. So if kids receive a good solid core program, and then we have a mechanism to track the data, that tells us which kids aren't quite there yet. As it stands, the current assessment system has no assessment for K through second grade outside of what the teachers are doing in class. So I've met with teachers. We have a group that's called our MTSS committee that started. I started when I got here in February, where we've involved some teachers. We have 5 teachers that have been involved in that committee. Nicole Cording, who's our reading facilitator, is also, I've tasked her with getting out and talking with staff at every level across all buildings. And the feedback that we've received that even at, beyond K-2, the MAP assessment that's currently being used, you'll see that on this side is the MAP assessment. You just look at, the strengths, the needs. What I think Acadians does for us is it gets to the foundational skills. You'll see that a lot of kids that struggle with that Keystone literature exam at the high school level, it's not because they're not comprehending what they read. It's because they lack the foundational skills to read. Starting with, the very basic, what this assessment measures. It'll measure letter knowledge. It measures letter sound correspondence. Then it moves up into fluency. Can a student read, understand letters and sounds, and can they read fluently? Do they understand the vocabulary? All of those things need to happen prior to a student having that ability to comprehend a text. So the current MAP assessment, which happens in grades 3 up, it really doesn't measure those foundational skills, and is pretty broad. And if you look at what that map assesses, that MAP assessment really assesses the same things that the PSSA measures. So it's almost like we're duplicating the same thing. We do that, 3 times a year. It's almost like we duplicate the same thing 3 times a year, and then they take the PSSA, and we get the same, almost the same essential data for those kids. So what this will do is, I think this will help us build that assessment system. If you talk with Pennsylvania Department of Education, or if you talk with Patan, they'll tell you the gold standard if you're building an MTSS system to help support those kids is either Acadians, they'll tell you, or the other one that's mentioned quite a bit is an assessment called AIMS-Web. We look at the cost of this in comparison to the current MAP assessment. I think it's listed on there. If it's not, I have it. So Acadians is $8 to $10 per student per year. The MAP assessment is $14 to $18 per student per year. So there is going to be a significant cost decrease if we would move towards this type of assessment. Nicole Cording, who you guys met last month, I couldn't say enough good things about her. She's on top of it. She's probably one of the best literacy experts. I just, in bouncing it off of her take was it's the gold standard. And with our MTSS committee, the teachers that are on that committee are saying, when asking them, what do you do with the MAP assessment when you get it? What do you do with the results from it? Their response is, we don't really do anything with it. So it's like we're spending $18 per student per year, and there's really nothing happening with the results of that. And I looked at it myself and thought to myself, how are we even going to develop intervention groups based upon this data? Because it is very general, it's very broad information. So it'll come with a cost decrease, over time. That'll save a lot of money, if we would use something like this. So we just wanted to open that up for a discussion. Teachers are on board. We vetted that out with them. Nicole's on board. It's the gold standard from the state. I think it makes sense. Just want to open it up for any thoughts, any questions.
The reading program that they started a year or so ago, does it fit into that?
It does. And if you look at that's the second to last one, the science of reading. So that reading program, the state is actually mandating that schools do training in the science of reading. They haven't mandated that schools use programming related to the science of reading. Eventually that's coming. So I think this is a good step for us to be out in front of the curve. We use a program that's aligned to the science of reading, and then this would be including an assessment that's also aligned to the science of reading. And the science of reading, it just makes so much sense. It's a lot of the way we all learned back in school. We were learning letters, and we're learning sounds, and we learned phonics and how to blend sounds. And over the years that shifted into this to a whole language approach where the philosophy was, well, if you surround the kids with books, they'll just somehow learn to read, and it's just weird.
That's not working.
It didn't work, and I think it's more of a shift towards going back to the basics, of blending sounds, understanding the letters, understanding sounds, blending sounds, and that's how someone learns to read.
Justin, can you explain under the Acadians reading the time and frequency and the progress monitoring?
Yeah, so Acadians is used as a benchmark, which would be 3 times per year. We would have kind of like a SWAT team that does that. So kids it won't take a whole class worth of time. So you're not going to assess all kids at the same time. So Nicole, we have already developed that team if the board is okay with it. We have our reading specialist and Nicole, who would kind of be our SWAT team, and they go out to the buildings, they'll pull individual students out, do their testing. The testing, I think it's like 1 to 3 minutes per module. And I think depending on the grade level, it could go up to 5. So, you're looking at about 15 minutes total per student. It's going to take some time away from the reading specialist. They'll take probably a few whole days doing, but it's not going to take kids out of class. The other part, once we get there, and I don't think we're there yet, I think, the focus for next year is on really, can we implement that core program with fidelity and implement that successfully so that we get 80% on target. I think eventually we're going to get to a point where we say, here's the data, here's the kids that need intervention, here's what evidence-based interventions we're providing for those kids in either reading or math. And then what you can do with Acadians is you do progress monitoring. So every 2 weeks, we'd have them assessed. So it'll tell you along the way. So if a kid is really struggling, right now our approach is we do 3 tests a year. We don't know how much progress they're making until winter, and then we don't know how much progress they're making until spring. Eventually, we want to get to a point where every 2 weeks we have new data on these kids. We have meetings that are happening, and we're adjusting that instruction. And that also kind of goes back to this special education, where when I started teaching, there was that knock on. I think I've told you guys that's the story of the knock on the door. I remember I went to the principal and said, well, how do kids get identified for the special ed services? And what I found out eventually was, well, if someone knocks on the school psychologist's door enough times, as opposed to there being a system where we're progress monitoring every 2 weeks and we've got data and we try an intervention, how do you know whether that program or that intervention works? It's looking at data to determine that. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the focus really should be on the core next year and implementing a good, solid data system that informs us of kids moving forward.
It just amazes me that they would have used that old system, because if you're looking under time and frequency, if you're looking at a 45 to a 60-minute test, okay, so even in grades 3 to 5, their attention span is not there.
Yeah.
I mean, are those even legitimate scores? Coming, I like the very much shorter, more often kids are not there. I think it's going to be the data is going to be a lot more true than what we had before.
Yeah, the reports that you get back based on the MAP assessment are going to be very generalized. It gives like a grade, it'll give like a grade level. And I'm not so much concerned about a grade level. If you tell me, my son or my daughter is reading 2 grade levels below where they should be, it tells me things are bad. It doesn't tell me what's bad.
Yeah.
And I think what this will do is tell me exactly where the issue is that we get kids help in, as opposed to it just being a grade level, or instructional level. They're 2 grade levels behind them. So it'll tell you what.
So Justin, the MTSS pretty much replaced the old RTI model.
Yeah.
And Nicole is an integral part of the literacy piece. And if we're successful with having someone in the math department serve similar to Nicole, will you plug her into that?
Yeah, she'll absolutely be involved as a math.
Just what the long stuff you gotta fix.
Justin. So does each teacher oversee the data for each student? Like, how does it go from the assessment to who does it go to next? Is it the teacher? Is it Nicole? I'm just in a gap there. Like, what's the process?
That's one of the other things that we need to work on is in school districts that do this really well, they'll have a building level data team where they have principal counselors, they'll have some grade level leaders that are part of that, where they're looking at, okay, so what can we do as a building to improve? And there are structures to meetings where it almost takes you, there's really not a whole lot of thought behind it. There's a meeting process where you look at these different components of the data that it produces. And then you have grade level team data meetings where they're looking at it more individual students. Little Johnny's struggling with, identifying letters. What's our plan? How do we map that out so that we can get Johnny's support doing letters? Little Susie's struggling with sounds. She's struggling with these specific sounds, SH, TH, or whatever it be. And then those grade levels are making, almost, individualized decisions for kids. But right now, like, our data team structures really don't exist. So I think where we want to start next year is we want to get a building level data team in each building for reading and math. And then a grade level meetings where they're looking at more specific student data. Eventually down the road, we want to get to a point where we have very specific, okay, here's the data, here's a student that's struggling with TH, here's the intervention program that they're using that's aligned to, the evidence that's out there that what works. I think I think sometimes you get into situations where, you're providing an intervention, but that intervention is just based on what the teacher feels is best, and that's good. At the same time, there are some things that are out there that really have some evidence behind them that work with sounds and blending sounds. So I think you start off with the building level, and then you have grade level team meetings, and then eventually you get to a point where you're pretty sophisticated with how you intervene with kids.
So if you have a student that's having a difficult time with sounds, like S or TH or whatever, is it the teacher that recommends speech therapy, or does that go to the admin? Like, where does the referral come from the
Yeah, a
teacher?
lot of time, but 90% of the time that comes from the teacher. Sometimes it's a parent request, but most of the time it comes from the teacher.
And they come into the school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Justin, is an integral part of this, as you know, the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. So on that committee, as you implement this, be sure you have outreach to those parents, because the parents that support at home, what you're doing in the classroom will raise the achievement even higher.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't do a great, not just clicking, we don't do a great job of reaching out to parents.
Right, and I think the other part that stands out to me about this is when I talk to principals, and Dr. Dean, I've talked about this many times. When you talk to principals about what they do with their math assessment data currently, and they'll openly admit, well, I don't really understand that data. And that's the problem, because if we're tasking, and I think Dr. D and I, our effort has been, we're tasking principals with being instructional leaders in their building. I've been a principal, and I've seen good principals, I've seen not so good principals. And I think when you see that really great principal, that great principal is an instructional leader in their building, not just hey, I'm gonna sit at my desk and I'm gonna do discipline when the discipline comes to me. They're the ones that are establishing those data teams. And I said, I don't think a lot of our principals have experience running data team meetings. And I said, we were working together at the MTSS committee, and their structures, I'll help model. There's a lot of ways that we can help build capacity, and I think they're all capable. I think it's just they didn't understand what that data is telling them, and I think that's the main
Right,
issue.
you're right, they're good managers and
Good managers.
yeah, but the next level is instructional leaders.
Yeah.
The 100%.
Yeah.
You're right on target.
So this system will fit into the whole general system you guys are working on about every 5 years or so. It'll fit right into that.
Yeah, for sure.
And
that'll guide the decisions I think that we make. I think when we go and we say, hey, we want a new program, or we want new materials or resources, if a teacher would come to me and say, hey, we need new materials for this. Right now, I'd say, I'm going on not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of data to tell me, but I think using something like this in the future, if someone says, we need a new math program, the first thing I'm going to say is, well, let's take a look at where our math program is successful and where it's not working. And sometimes you make decisions like, you have a solid math program in most of the areas, but there's a few things that you just, in math, you might struggle with geometry. We might be struggling in geometry with the data. And then we start saying, as a team of teachers, how can we really build, knowing that our program isn't really doing it, how can we make up for a deficiency in a program?
so when do you want to start it?
I'd like to start it next year.
And so you said it was going to come with a little bit of increase. Are you talking a little bit? The only reason I ask is, have you talked to Eric?
Yeah. So Eric is good, and so we have a contract. The unfortunate part about these things is we have a contract with the MAP assessment for another year, and so we're going to be we'll be paying for this, but in year 2, when we'll abandon the MAP assessment the following year, which we pay about $20,000 for, this will be about $12,000. So it'll save. So while we might be taking a little hit next year, long term, you're going to save $8,000 every year there on after. So it's kind of make up for itself. Now we could use MAP assessment again next year through the year, and again, I don't not it's not going to be super useful, and pay for we pay for both, or we could just pay for the MAP assessment next year with $20,000, get through next year, and move on to a cadence the year after. I almost kind of feel like.
No, I wouldn't wait. Too many of our programs depend on data and we need it. We need it now.
Well, that's my whole point. That what you guys are doing, everybody in general, everybody, is we're bringing in a whole new system so that
To build on this.
since I talk about money quite often, since we have a system, it will be so much easier. It's never easy.
Yeah.
It'll be easier.
Yeah.
Or as my dad would say, gooder. For him to plan all these things.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah,
debits and credits, all,
Having a good data system is essential. I mean, it's a foundational piece.
And part of the urgency of wanting to do this meeting so quickly, the education committee, is to get you on board because we need to get information out to our teachers before this school year.
Exactly, so they're prepared.
So they know, we didn't want to just send it out without forming you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
What the plan
teachers,
looks like.
every teacher that I've talked to has been on.
Well, I think we're sending the wrong message anyhow, if we don't take that step and bite the bullet this year. Because then we're leaving that whole dynamic out of there again. You've got,
Or we're just extending our pain here longer. So I do have a question for you. And I don't know if this is applicable to this or not. It's just because it's when we have been given our assessments for the last, well, since I've been on the board anyways, from, the elementary schools and the middle school, and all they talked about was percent growth, as opposed to raw data numbers.
Yeah.
So we're gonna be looking here at raw data numbers, like where that, not just percent growth.
Yeah, it'll give you like the amount of students that are on. I mean, if you want generalized information, it'll give you the amount of students that are on target or on track.
Okay,
But then if you wanted a breakdown of every student, even by name, in each of those shorter tests in each one of those measures, you'll have a breakdown of where they're at in every single area. Which, in 1 to 3 minute assessments 3 times a year, it's quick and easy for kids. Not quick and easy for, and Nicole knows that.
yeah.
It's not gonna be quick and easy for Nicole. It's not gonna be quick and easy for the reading specialist.
Yeah.
It will be quick and easy for the regular classroom teacher.
Yeah.
They won't be taking the 40 to 60, 45, 60 minutes to give that other assessment.
Data.
And, it does. It definitely does. It breaks it down into each one of those areas.
and you think 1 to 3 minutes is enough time to check that? You said 3 times a
Yeah,
year?
yeah.
And that's enough time to check that?
But,
It doesn't take long. If you've got a good data system, it doesn't take long to be able to, by when you sit and you read with kids, it doesn't take more than a paragraph to know if,
Well, that's true.
where all
Okay.
failings are.
Think too about this. So if I'm doing a letter identification check with you, I can do that in 3 minutes. If I'm doing a letter sound check with you, I can do that in 3 minutes. Like all of those things, it's letter checks, it's sound checks, it's vocabulary check, it's a fluency check. And eventually, as kids get older, there's a lot more comprehension
I was gonna
based
say comprehensive.
checks. And, we don't do a lot of those letter identification checks in like 5th grade. But if a kid is really struggling with their comprehension, we go back and we say, okay, so if he's not comprehending what he's reading, then we go back to, well, there's gotta be
What
some
component
type
did he
of,
miss?
there's something
Yeah.
here.
Exactly right.
Is it fluency? Are they able to read fluently? It's almost that it goes from comprehension back to, are they able to read fluently? Because maybe they're not comprehending because they can't read fluently. Why can't they read fluently? Might go back to letter sound, might go back to sounds. And if they're still struggling with that, might go back to just letter identification.
Okay, so you identify there's a problem. Is the teacher themselves going back each time? Like, how does that come into time constraints with the classroom? Or does that go to a reading specialist?
It'll be like the same people who will do the assessment will be the same throughout. So they'll be the ones that, and what's nice about only like 3 or 4 people doing the assessment, that they'll all be trained the same way. You
Yep.
know that it'll be done the same exact way every single
You'll
time.
have
So,
continuity.
How many
Yeah.
reading specialists do we have? I know at LVE, do we have one out
yeah,
of that?
we have 2 reading specialists and then that'll be basically the team, and they'll travel from building to building and fall, winter, spring. Yes.
Okay,
Justin, do the learning support students get tested for kids?
Yeah, they will. Yep. Yep. And then the other nice part about like within the special education population, we can do that progress monitoring with them right away. And the learning support teachers, well, we'll have to get them trained, and that might not start right from the start of the school year, but we can have them trained. Their IEP goals should really be based upon these and then it's another
Yep.
rabbit hole you can jump down. But IEP goals should really be based upon the foundational skills. And if they're based on the foundational skills, how they track progress on their IEPs could really be the progress monitoring that happens every 2 weeks as part of this. And it's kind of nice and easy once you get used to it. It's a matter of let's get everybody
up and
used to
running.
it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
That's the thing with, with
Anything.
change.
Yep.
Sometimes, like my former superintendent used to say, there's two things people hate: change and the way things are.
Yep.
So,
Very
there might be, when we ask people to progress monitor every 2 weeks, there might be a little headache with that, but it's ultimately the right thing for kids, I think.
So what you're looking for today is a board agreement
Committee
that we
approval
move
to
forward
move it.
with this.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
so
certainly in agreement.
who are my backups? Jen and Gary. Yes, your go.
100%.
All right,
Yes.
agenda item number 2 is, a new teacher induction day proposal. So, one thing that and we're very fortunate this year that I think we're only gonna have one new staff member, but, so the proposal is, that we have at least a day prior to the start of like teacher in service and Act 80 days for all new teachers. And the reason I bring this up is that there are so many things that even this past year, teachers have been trained on letters, they've been trained on active shooter procedures, they've been trained on, behavior, classroom management, they've been trained on all of these things throughout the course of a year. Then new teachers are hired, and then we do a whole new set of like next year, we're gonna do a whole new set of trainings than we did this year. So it'd be nice if prior to the Act 80 and in-service days, any new teachers that are hired by our school district go through a day or 2 days of, at least I might not be able to give them a full-blown letters training in a day, but I can at least get them up to speed with, generally speaking, with where other people are at. I think it helps with, if we want to shape new teachers into our district, we have our vision for what we want to see with our students. We have a vision for, the board, the administration has a vision for what we want out of new hires that come into the school district. I think it's a good look, when you're hired in a new place. I remember you probably talked to when you were hired as a new teacher. I remember when I was hired as a new teacher, it was like, I get there and it's like, okay, I don't have any books. I don't have any, and then you go talk to the teacher across the hallway and they're like, oh, we'll use this or use that. And you didn't feel like there was a good support system.
Yeah, you just thrown in. Here you go. Congratulations, boom.
Yeah.
Do they have refreshers for the teachers that are already there also for all this stuff that they?
Yeah, it's the problem is time. It's we only have so much time and so many Act 80 and in-service days. There's certain trainings you have to do on a yearly basis that those safety trainings you have to do on a yearly basis. But if we want to become more sophisticated with safety, like you might do an active shooter training this year. Next year you might do a reunification training, like kids had to evacuate a building, where do they go? And then if there's a major incident, how do you reunify students with their parents? So there's a progression of safety, and I think we're in a pretty good spot safety wise. We certainly be better, but there's a progression with that. There's a progression with with the letters training. They've all received course 1 this year. What about the people that didn't attend? Now we're trying to figure out. And there's only limited time to do it. So I think things like this, I think things like this would be important, especially for, if we've done something important and we think it's important, we should let our new teachers know about it, and also let them know there's a good support system for them as they come to us and that we've got it together.
So I'm gonna move on to the discussion. I hope we can shorten this very quickly if anybody read it. So I'm assuming that these are gonna be 1 or 2 extra days outside their contracted time.
Yeah,
All right, and with any, I don't know about anybody's job, but no matter where you go, when I went to Idlewild, each North Block, whenever you go, you do onboarding, they pay you for that time.
yeah,
So I'm just going to say, go to, compensate as part of onboarding, but it's required.
yeah.
It's not optional,
Yeah.
but we will pay them those extra days to come.
Yeah, so we did something similar to this when I was in Johnstown. We did something similar to this when I was in Indiana. There was 2 different ways that it was handled in my experience. And Dr. D, you might have a different experience. So in Johnstown, when you were hired in Johnstown, they said as a condition of your employment, you will attend these 3 or 2 days or 1 day prior to the start of the school year. There was no additional pay or anything like that. And then in Indiana, we paid staff their curriculum rate to attend those days prior to. I think you could really go either way on this one. We'd have to have some discussions with the union too, but just to, see what their
I
take
think
is, but-
that's very sticky, especially with the union,
Yeah,
that you just
yeah,
ask people to work without pay.
Yeah, and the thing of it is the world does it that way.
Yeah.
Culture does it. If you've got to do onboarding, that time that you do onboarding, that you get paid for that
Our
outside of your
superintendent
contract.
in Johnstown said, you're not officially hired until you take part in this training.
Mhm.
So
That's what I was-
that's one way.
That's what I was used to, it's
Yeah.
always the condition, but if you wanna pay the person, understand, you gotta get the union on board with it too, so that because they're contracted 187 days, whatever.
Right.
Would have to do some discussion there. I
Yeah.
can go either way on that one.
Yeah, I could too, and that's, let that for the board to decide, because that's gonna cost some.
Jen, what's your recommendation?
I agree, they should.
Can you come back with the
Additional,
recommendation
very
after
much
meeting with the
recommendation.
union?
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, we can.
What's your recommendation, to pay them additional or to make it part of their
I-
regular
I
salary?
think we need to get it all straightened out with the union. I was secretary treasurer of our local. I know how unions can,
Yeah.
it just depends.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes. Cheapest route is always better, but we still have to have it done. So if they can go ahead and make it a condition of employment, that's one thing, but I suspect there'd have to be some kind of pay.
Well, yeah, I think,
Yeah.
if I'm a union president, I'm saying this needs to happen, and if however it needs to happen, whether it be a condition of employment or via pay, I'm
Still-
good, I think I'd probably be okay with it, because schools out there, they do it both ways, and some do it this way, some do it that way. Some school districts, administration or board will say, well, it's a condition of employment, if it's not a condition of employment, we're not providing.
Still outside. of
Bottom line is,
contract.
Yeah.
if
no,
we
I
want
agree.
quality
I still
people-
think, yeah, it's outside their contracted amount of days. I still.
So you're comfortable, allowing me to meet with the union reps, to get their take on it, and then I'll let you know, and most likely it's gonna be some type of stipend or something.
Yeah.
some,
Might be somewhere in between,
Yeah.
a per diem rate versus some type of rate.
Even with the Commonwealth, your onboarding day was always HR, insurance, all that
Right.
kind of stuff, and you got paid for that.
Sure, okay. Yeah, I talked to them all the time, so I could do
Mhm.
that.
All right, and the other thing to consider with this is, some years are gonna be great, some years are not. So like this year coming up, we only have a school counselor that would come in, and it's, that training it's gonna be more like one-on-one, which is great for
Yeah.
that person.
Yeah.
We wouldn't require some sort of training in a different capacity for our security people coming in? On a whole different level, of course, but
Yeah,
we
yeah,
wouldn't wanna require them as well.
yeah.
Because how do you handle
Yeah.
the HR part of all of that, sick days, but how do you handle that if
Yeah,
they're coming in
because
and
it's not
day
union.
one you're working? So
Yeah.
there's gotta be some kind of a, yeah, there's gotta be some time
Yeah.
of set aside for that.
Onboarding for safety.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Um,
It is, it's very, I don't, let's use common sense. When you're going into a job, it doesn't matter what your position is. If you're a matron, if you're in the kitchen, you need onboarding, right? When you're brand new, you can't just be thrown in there and expect people to know what.
How do you know what
to
the
do.
guidelines are and the rules?
Yeah, and even if they did it before somewhere else, every different, place of hire is different.
Yeah, it seems like schools specifically don't do a good job with onboarding.
They do
That's-
not.
And I think that's the goal. And so, like I was gonna say, some years it's gonna be like, that, you know, if you
Minimal.
are paying for it.
Yeah,
Some years it's gonna be, like this year's not gonna be,
No.
a huge cost.
Yeah.
You might get a year where you have 20, 30 retirements though.
it's not
And,
gonna happen here for a while. We just did that.
right, right. So, but you
We,
might get.
we just went through that. I don't see that. We may get a couple with the early out offer MOU and the contract the next 2 years. But we're not, because we just got done hiring in the last, 3 years, and we probably hired 20 teachers.
Oh my gosh, we
Yeah,
saw here
it
for
was-
hours
yeah,
and
We
hours.
had years in Indiana where we had, 20 or 30 new hires. We had a separate elementary onboarding and
Yeah.
a separate secondary.
Absolutely.
So we might, eventually down the road, we might get to that point.
Well, again, Eric can look at the numbers and build that into the budget,
Mhm.
because he can do that.
Well, again, it fits into all you guys, what you're doing
It's in the plan.
system wise and getting everything developed and
Yep.
keep things rolling, then we'll make it better for that too.
Easier down.
You'll have a system in place.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Everybody good?
We're good. Do it, good work.
All right. So the next one, I know we've talked about this, we've talked about this before. So what I'd like to do is, if possible, if you guys are okay with it, get on the next board meeting agenda in June, the curriculum cycle for approval and the timeline. So you'll see on like this curriculum cycle. The keys on this one are the adoption years. I think yours are highlighted in yellow. I'm gonna get a highlight.
Yeah.
So you look at the adoption years, that's the year that there will be a presentation to the board, and that there will be, with those presentations, if you look at the timeline. So we'll start in September. And my thought is, like who would be involved, the administration board, teachers, obviously, teachers will be involved throughout. Once we get to the point of like February, we look at, are there any vendors? In some cases, we might say, hey, we can make, teachers can make revisions to the curriculum. Data shows everything looks pretty good. There's gonna be years where we don't need any vendors to come in. And those are good years, because those are years you're not gonna spend a whole lot of money. But then in May, that adoption years when they would, it's mainly gonna be teachers that make that presentation to the board in May. So next year in May, the two that would come to present to you would be, and the only unfortunate part about this is those meetings will sometimes get long, and we try to keep the presentations within like 15 minutes or so. But you'll look on next year in May, we'll be looking at library and math, the secondary level. The only thing that, the only concerns that might come out of this curriculum cycle is there might be a subject area or two that say, hey, well, we want ours next year, we want ours next year. The unfortunate part is you can't do them all in 1 year, and you have to take your time. I think what we'll see through next year as we do this, and as we see, some data coming in, we may want to at some point make some adjustments to this, and that's fine. But any adjustments that are made to this should be board
Absolutely.
approved. Like anything that happens on here really should be board approved, because, if a teacher comes to me and says, well, I think science should happen next year, and I just agree and change it, like that's not the practice that we want, in the district. I think, anything that would get changed would come to the board for approval, but this is kind of like start.
That's law.
If you look at the years after the adoption, so that would be implementation year. And if you look at, I know my eyes aren't great and I would need glasses, but if you look at the implementation year, that's the year where a lot of professional development's gonna happen. And then the modification refinement years, those years will be where we're getting out surveys to teachers to ask them their feedback on the new programs or new curriculum that we've implemented. We'll get those surveys, and occasionally, like when those not occasionally, but when those surveys go out, like I just do a Google form, and I'll have some questions that are on that Google form related to the curriculum. Teachers fill that out. It charts and graphs it real nice and easy. I'll just share those when I get those. I'll share those with the board, as feedback. it won't happen all the time, probably more like once a year on those modification refinement years, that you'll get some feedback and some data from teachers on how they think the curriculum's going. Plus, we'll have some data, in most subjects. The subject where it's hard is like, we have art that comes up for curriculum review. There's not a whole lot of data outside like grades.
I was just
and
gonna
that
ask
sort of
about
thing.
art.
Same thing with like, with library, and family consumer sciences.
Music.
There's not a whole lot of data that at least we'll be able to provide outside of that teacher feedback.
So if you look, just for an example, technology and community, well, no, that's not a good example, a math class. So there's always more than one math teacher, so each teacher would be required to teach the same module, maybe different
Yeah.
ways, change it up how it works best for them, but.
Yeah.
So they couldn't take a module out and say, I'm not teaching this.
Right. So, so eventually when we roll through the curriculum, we'll have exactly, the written curriculum. And that, that written curriculum provides some it should provide some flexibility. I can give you a story. When I was at Johnstown, we had a curriculum that was written almost by day. As a principal, I was mandated by our superintendent. Teachers had to put a little blue card outside their room and said what lesson they're on, what day they're on.
Oh, wow.
Rigid,
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah,
And one of my jobs as
That's-
principal was to go on and check the sign that was outside in the hallway and what they were teaching in class. And that was, so we don't want to do that. in
No,
any way.
no, no, no.
No,
Create
that's
these-
hard.
I'm more,
We
more
want to
like,
give, we want everybody, if they're teaching the same thing, we want them to be on the same, general
General
pace.
sentence, yeah.
But if they're, if they're a
Day
day or
or
two,
ahead,
or
yes.
even a week off,
Yep.
that's fine.
Yeah.
We just don't want them to be, this teacher has blown through it and is now in where they should be in May and January, and this teacher's on pace. We don't want it to be, there to be so far of a
I
gap.
was referring more to knowing that we had some teachers purchasing a curriculum instead of using what we had, and I understand it wasn't a great curriculum,
Yeah.
but you had that group of students learning this way, and so that's why I'm trying to
And those are
clarify.
gonna be things that we deal with until we roll through a cycle. That are it's gonna almost be individual, like if this teacher's using this and it's effective, like, we're gonna have to go with it until we
Get some
have
data.
something,
Mhm.
Solidified.
And I'm gonna interject one thing, as we move those principals to instructional leaders. Those things will also be taken care of.
Okay. Good.
So in your layout of the curriculum. Is everything done is there any piloting prior to actually purchasing?
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that exploration and development, like the year before a curriculum is up for adoption. That's when, if we would decide to do any pilots, again, any pilots, we're not just gonna, like, I'm not gonna just decide that, like, anytime we pilot something, that'll be, board approved pilots. So in that year prior to adoption, we start thinking in that exploration portion is when we start thinking about the following year and start looking at what vendors are out there that provide this. If there's someone that wants to pilot something, we try not to ever, I know there was this, when I was in Indiana, there was a math situation. We had 6 pilots happening all at once.
Ooh, that's
And
a
like,
lot.
when you're looking at data, you don't know, you have no idea. So, that's the year, like the year prior to adoption is the year to do pilots. Yeah.
Yeah, because Kirsty had asked me, like, why didn't we do a pilot for the science program? And I said, we just didn't have enough time because we took a long time trying to implement the committee. So we just didn't have the time for that this particular time, but in the future, that was our plan.
Yeah, and generally speaking, just to make sure that things keep clean. You try not to do any pilots unless they're on that year before adoption. I know it's tempting, it's tempting for me, it's tempting for all of us to want to say, if a teacher comes to me and says, oh, wait, there's all these issues with all these things. And, I think that would be the point where I'd come back to you and say, do we want to do something? Do we not want to do something? But if you can stick to only pilots on the year before adoption, it makes it so much cleaner, and that you don't have all of these different things happening throughout the district that nobody knows anything about.
So
Majority
what,
of the teachers did want to pilot, but
Yeah.
you're right, we just didn't have time. But that is also, like you just keep saying, the systems will allow that
It's
to
so
happen.
Yeah.
And majority of the teachers that we talked to during that whole science thing that MJ led, they all wanted to do that.
Yeah.
You know, they,
And it's hard because a lot of times, there will be times, it'll be hard for me where there's, a teacher has a great idea. They say, hey, I want to try this. And I have to say no, because it's, we have a process and there's, but like once that process runs and the cycle goes through, teachers will understand that process better. Because I think if it's kind of that willy-nilly approach where, hey, I'm just gonna go and ask and see if I can do this, and he says yes, then I just go do this, and then this teacher goes,
Do that.
so you can't do
Right.
that. You
Which
feel
is why
bad
we
when
have
teachers
six
have really
programs and only use 3
good
of them.
ideas.
well, just go put a blue card up at every building and say, this is part of the system.
so is there?
I'm sorry.
No, that's actually funny. So is there a recommended time frame for a pilot program? We wouldn't do a year, would we? Would we do like?
Sometimes they're like 6 months, sometimes they're,
Okay.
sometimes they're a quarter, sometimes at the end of a year, we just try out 6 weeks, it just
Previous
depends.
administration.
Right, so okay, just an idea. I know it's not a rigid thing, but
Yeah.
It
Just,
depends on the
so
subject.
Jen, are you good to put this on the agenda? Gary?
Yes.
Good, okay, Justin, you're going. I just want to say this mainly for the public that's listening. Justin really knows what he's doing, but
Mhm.
there's gonna be bubbles along the way. Nothing is gonna be smooth and nothing happens overnight.
Yep.
This is a massive change for this
Mhm.
school district. It's a massive change for everybody.
Mhm.
But I don't think we could have gotten a better person to be in charge of it than Justin, so thank you.
And,
I'll second that.
there are gonna be moments throughout this where some things come up that I'm gonna have a hard time saying no to, and there's gonna be, people that come to you as a board that you're gonna have a hard time saying no to. I had a former superintendent, he would say all the time, trust the process, trust the process, trust the
Right.
process. And I think that's what we will have to say to ourselves is,
Yep.
eventually we're gonna get there, but it has to correct itself here.
Exactly.
You have to be consistent.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think a lot of the staff that are out there, they mean so well, and when they bring something to you, it's with the very best of intentions, and that's when it becomes, that's when it becomes hard.
Yeah.
Well, that happened, you're talking about a little bit of hiccups and the public needs to be patient. We ran into that. Well, I know I ran into that with some of the when we brought cursive writing back into the school. And so we were looking at that for second and third grade. I had parents call and say, what about my kid? And I just said, we have to start somewhere, and it's, we have to just try to catch up there.
Yeah, I think it's a trust the process, and that's
Mhm.
something we'll have to keep reminding ourselves.
Mhm. But it's unfortunate that it happens like that, but we have to start
Yeah.
and put it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must be Bubba, huh?
All right, so next one is for,
Perfect timing.
Maria.
Justin, you saw Bubba came in, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maria and I worked on a summary of, Rich Mader came in, did a safety assessment. We don't want to talk about that too much in a public session. Those are executive session things. We don't want our safety things coming out publicly. But one of the biggest things from Rich Mader's safety assessment was the idea of engaging an expert. Maria's solid. She's about as good as a principal gets when it comes to understanding safety. But that's not the type of expertise that, Rich is mentioning in his report. I did work with Bubba when I was at Indiana. Bubba's probably the best and brightest safety guy that I know of. So I brought him here. That really is it with item number 4. I'll pass it over to Bubba. Bubba can talk to you about what he does. He provides consulting services for quite a few school districts. It's up to you guys. However you want to, whatever direction you want to go. I know Bubba from Indiana, and Bubba was excellent. But again, at the end of the day, ultimately, it's your call on how we want to move forward. One of the biggest things was that they said that we needed to have ongoing, at least monthly safety meetings with a core team where we're talking through training, we're talking through how we do, tabletop exercises for safety, things that are happening throughout the district. And like I said before, there's that progression. You might start off at an active shooter, but that progresses into more and more so that we just become as good as we can possibly get.
So, well, good morning.
Good
Thank you
morning.
so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
It was a beautiful drive over here, but great scenery that is, huh? So I'm about 40 minutes away from where I live. I'm from Nanny-Glo, Pennsylvania.
Oh.
Nanny Glow.
Nanny-Glo, yep, I policed locally for a long time. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years. The majority of my career, I was a police detective. I investigated things like homicide and armed robbery and sexual assaults and all those kind of things. I also worked on a cold case murder unit for many years. I was an undercover narcotics agent for 15 years. I bought drugs off the bad guys for a long time. That's how I do it. But after my time on the road, if you will, I went to St. Francis University, where I became the chief of police there and the director of safety and security. For 10 years at St. Francis, it was my job to build all the policy, the procedures and protocols and practices on how to keep that university safe. We developed all the policies, and it was my job to tabletop and practice them and make sure that everybody knew what we were going to do in a time of an emergency or a disaster or a crisis. So after leaving St. Francis, we started our own company, my wife and I. It's called Fitzola Group, where we've been in business for about 5 years now doing consultation work, and it's gotten crazy, right? So unfortunately, there's a lot of bad things that happen in our society to schools and churches and businesses and sports teams. And what my company does is we consult with schools and churches and we provide them safety and security. We help them develop all their plans. We implement safety teams and practices and policies and protocols on how they'll do these things through the school year. We coincide with all the stipulations in laws that come out with Act 55, Act 33, Act 44, PCCD, PDE, or the new name, whatever that is for PDE. But that's what we do. We help schools. Because safety isn't easy. It's a lot. And we have a very efficient and effective way to develop things in schools and make sure as the school year goes on that we're developing and constantly implementing things with staff and students and administrators. And we're checking all those boxes as the school year goes on to make sure we're abiding by the rules and regulations of what our state and federal government tell us we have to do. It's a lot. Yeah, I heard Justin talk about your safety and security coordinator, a principal, I believe you said it was. That's a lot of work. On top of being a principal, to do all the safety and security is another hat that she has to wear. And sometimes it's tough to get to safety and security. So in other schools, what we do is we make sure we have monthly meetings where we sit down with what we call a core team or an emergency operation team, and we're constantly going over what have we done, what's next, where do we want to be a month from now, where do we want to be 6 months from now, what do we want to do in the summer, how do we want to bring all of our first responders together and do a walkthrough, how do we want to do a drill, how do we want to do all these things, so we're constantly preparing for the next step. We believe in the Fitzola Group, my company, that there is safety and longevity. I've been in Indiana area school district where I met Justin for about 7 years now, I believe. We do the same thing over and over and over again. We say the same words and tell these kids and staff members the same things every year because we want to train their brains to tell their bodies, this is what you do when bad things happen. If there's a gunman, if a bomb goes off, if the roof collapses, if somebody has a knife, if we have to run out of here, if we have to evacuate, whatever it may be, we don't want to know that we just did it a couple times. We want to know that these kids have been doing this since they've been in the elementary schools. Then they just keep growing up with the same verbiage and the same thought process. And then God forbid, if the worst day ever happens at your school, we're not pretending like we check a box and they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, at Indiana Area School District, we've done it so long the same way that other schools come to that school district to see how they do it. Show us what your kids know, and then we put on that example. We have little elementary kids, when we signify that there's something wrong, they don't even have to be led by teachers. They crawl out a window, they run up the embankment, and they hide behind a rally point that they already know, and they're in the 3rd grade. We teach it from day one. And it's unfortunate we have to do this, but we have to. They have to have a plan. And we have to train your staff and students to be able to respond without being told what to do. We live in a world where if somebody comes into a school with a gun or a knife, all the adults and the kids think somebody's going to go knock on their door and say, okay, here's what we do. That's not how it works. That's not the real world. The real world is they better have an answer. So we make sure they have a plan. And we implement these trainings and these drills and these practices throughout the school year. And while we're doing that, we check all of these boxes. And then we tell the state and the federal government we're doing exactly what you want us to do. And then we do assessments. How are we doing after the school year? We go over our emergency operation plan, your book of best practices. Every year by law, you have to review it. And you have to sign off and say we've made corrections or we're going with the same old plan. We go over that plan to make sure it's your plan and that it is actually going to save lives. So these are some of the things we do with schools. But I think where we make a difference is we're the people that come in and keep you going. We keep the ball rolling. Because when it's an extra hat to wear, your other job takes over. And the next thing you know, you haven't done safety or security for about 2 or 3 months. Not because you didn't want to, not because you didn't find it important. You just have a job to do. So we make sure that the ball is always rolling and that we're always doing something with safety and security. And then at the end of the school year, when we sit down with the school board members, we say, look at what we've done. This is how far we've come in the school year. And this is what we're going to do in the summer. This is what we're going to do next year and the year after that. And safety and security always stays a priority in schools. That's what my company does. That's what so many schools count on us to do, is keep that ball rolling to make sure that it's a priority. And that on your worst day, you have an answer. Because the law says you have to have a due diligence and a duty of care to your staff and students. That means, what did you do to prepare them for their worst day? That's really what it's all about. So that's a lot in a little bit. And I would love to answer any questions you have for me. We can talk about any topic and any subject. I'll give you the best of what I have. I have no problem talking, as you can see. I'll stand here for hours to talk to you guys. I know it doesn't bother me.
So my husband's an assistant fire chief, so I have a relationship with all of our local people.
Perfect.
I actually had them do a suggestion, and everybody's probably going to be like, holy crap, no. But I was asked if for the initial starting point, if we could consider a drill that is completely unannounced.
Yes.
And send out a text message as we're starting or right before and say the school's conducting a drill to see where we are. But I'm just passing that along that I have people approach me about that.
I love that you say that. And believe it or not, our this state, this Commonwealth, wants us to get good at unannounced drills. But there's very specific things you do in an unannounced drill, though. Mm-hmm. Just because it's unannounced doesn't mean you should put people in any kind of liability.
No, right.
Way. Yeah.
And more of like here's where we start and what do we know and how do we go from there?
Yeah, so let me tell you, who are we and where do we go from here, right? I do unannounced drills at schools. And usually we do unannounced drills when we already have a foundation, right? Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example. The world of fire drills are changing, okay? In today's world, there's such a thing called a tactical pause. Now, this totally blows people away because we know that in fire drills, at businesses, and schools, and churches throughout time, we always got evaluated on how quick we were, right? How quick can we be at getting people out of the school? We got to a point at St. Francis University that I had to do a law. It took us this many minutes, this many seconds. That's how precise we had to be because it was all about speed. Right? Well, now everything's changing. Now we're taking a step backwards in fire drills and taking what's called a tactical pause. Because here's how the world has changed on us. If you're going to get good as a school district on keeping the bad guy out of your school, keeping the shooter out of your school, because now you have locked doors and you have speaker systems and cameras and all these things in place to make sure that the wrong people aren't walking into a school. If we're going to keep the bad guy out, well, then that guy's going to advance what he does and figure out how to get us out of the school, man. Mm-hmm. Right? Yep. If you're going to get good at what you do, The bad guy's gonna say, well, then I'll get you all out of the school.
Yep.
And if a fire alarm goes off, guess what everybody's doing? They're running out of the school. So if the bad guy can set off a fire alarm or call in a bomb threat and know that you're gonna evacuate no matter what, because that's your protocol, now the active shooter doesn't even have to come in your school anymore. Now they just sit outside and call in, put a bomb. And if your past practice is just to evacuate without assessing it, without taking that tactical pause, now everybody runs to an evacuation like that guy pulls out a gun and has everybody in there. See what I mean?
Yep.
So, yes, being more advanced in time makes sense once you can hang your hat on something and say, here's who we are, here's what we do. Now let's be site specific about the little things that can happen to us. So I love that you say that, and that's great things to do once you have a foundation to build off of. Wonderful.
I agree. We need it. I don't know about anybody else, but this is where we are very lame. I have gotten comments from teachers, from parents, from little kids. The kids in school system come up and say, what do we do if this happens? What do we, and the teacher's like, I don't know. There is no plan. You know, they have no plan. So.
And we wanna get them at a point where
Yes.
they know exactly what to do.
Yep.
We don't know what we don't know.
Mm-mm.
If, you know, if you would have brought me into here today and said, listen, we're short on staff, we need a history teacher, right? And I'd have said, hey, I'll help you out. In 5 days, you'd have told me hit the road because I don't know what I'm doing. You'd have been like, Bobby, you're really bad at this. And I'd have been right, because I don't know what I'm doing. We don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
And when it comes to safety and security, if you're gonna do this the right way,
Mhm.
it's gotta be from somebody who knows.
Well, you also have to, like, our staff has to be trained as well, not to bend the rules, even just 2 minutes. Like I had someone approach me and say, you know, the doors at the high school are supposed to open at what, 7?
Mhm.
And the doors are open at 5 till with nobody standing there. And so what happens in that 5 minutes? Somebody knows that
Somebody knows they can do
somebody
that.
knows they can do
Yep.
that, or just walk in and there's nobody there to check. And I'm not trying to criticize, I'm saying
It's-
things like that are happening
Absolutely.
and we can't, or propping a door open because it's warm in there, things like that that seem harmless, but they're really not.
Crime is opportunistic.
Mhm.
Being a police detective as long as I've been, crime is opportunistic. If you provide an opportunity, criminals will find you. Criminal acts will find you.
Yep.
If you take opportunity away, criminals go somewhere else. Criminals don't want to fail. They look for opportunity.
Yep.
And if people are opening up earlier, popping doors, that's opportunity.
Mhm.
People sit back and go, that's how I did it. That's how I did it. That's what they do. When you take them away, they go somewhere else and don't commit the act.
Joe was really big on that. Even he said, I got in the school.
Yep,
And I'm like,
it was-
whoa, how did
yep.
you do that? But I thought he was, you know, just pulling
No.
string, but he was able to walk
Nope, he
right
really
in.
was able to walk right in.
And you know what? I don't want you to beat yourself up too much on that. These aren't jails. You don't work in a prison, right? You don't hear the click clack and everything locks down automatically. But you can be very good at who you are and what you do. So when somebody does come up to you and say, hey, I can make entry to your school, then tell me how, and how do we get better at that?
This is why.
You know, you're just, so this never ends. People bring me in and go, so when does it end, Bubba? Right? It doesn't.
Mhm.
There's always something else to get better at, safety and security.
Mhm.
But as long as that ball's rolling, as long as there's somebody making sure that it's always doing something, by the end of the school year, you're like, we did a lot.
Mhm.
We've really done a lot of safety and security.
Bubba,
Yes,
let me
sir.
interrupt you. So, at our last administrative meeting, we addressed some of the issues about, the building being open and not having enough security. But if the board agrees to go with your company for some guidance,
Yes.
we're in a process of, having security guards in all 5 buildings. And whether or not the last building in high school is an SRO or security guard, whatever we decide, would you also be able to coordinate how this works? For instance, yesterday I went up to meet with one of the people and he was out sick. So there was nobody in the building, our high school building, which is probably the highest priority building. So in my mind, if we have security guards in all the buildings, I might take somebody from another building that's less viable
Yeah.
to move there. I mean, is that the kind of stuff you do also? And how to
Absolutely.
work with these 5 people?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've done, through the years here, I've been involved in a lot of school board meetings and conversation and executive sessions about, should we get an SRO, should we get an SPO, a school police officer, an SSO, a school security officer? There are 3 types of security you can have. Each one of them brings something different, but ultimately do the same thing ultimately. It's about what's best for your school, but yes, I would absolutely sit down and go, so here's the pros and cons, here's what other school districts are doing, here's what they found advantageous, here's what has been a struggle for them, things like that.
So we have you, I think, on an agenda for a follow-up meeting if the board's interested. Is that correct? Justin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, that way all board members can hear, you know, the differences, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we're all educated on what's best for Ligonier Valley.
Yeah, I'd love to hear this, auto security, who, again, that's the world we're living in. Whether we like it or not, you know, we need a response to somebody that's trying to hurt us, but there's a lot of things that you can talk about with SROs, SSOs, and SPOs. And ultimately, it's about getting the right person. It really is at the end of the day. Once you all agree on what you're going to get, then it's about, let's find the right person. Because once you find the right people to put in these buildings, then they go do their job and you're allowed to do yours.
So we just ran an advertisement for the security officers in the other buildings. And at some point, we need to interview people to see who the best fit is. These are just for the security officers. Most are retired state police,
Sure.
et cetera.
Sure.
So we may pull your expertise into
Absolutely.
that, if that's okay.
I've said, schools bring me in to sit in those interviews, to ask questions of the people, you know, knowing what safety and security looks like inside of the school, because let's be honest. And I'm not by any chance, you know, or belittling anyone. I was law enforcement for many years. Just because you were a police officer does not mean you can step into this world and understand it. Those are two different worlds. There's a lot of background. There's a lot of history and experience that comes with being a police officer that you bring here that is very valuable. But that doesn't mean you understand the school safety part of it. So when you're hiring somebody, that's, and we spoke before, sir, where we said, you know, ultimately, you know what you want? You want someone outside of all their skill set that can build a relationship with students to the point where if someone ever comes inside your school with a gun, knife, or bomb, they feel comfortable enough walking up to them and going, Joey has a gun. When that relationship's built, you're doing it right. That stops shootings. That stops people from dying.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
And you know, our demographics of our four schools are very different.
Mhm.
And that's a big thing. But you know, your comment about the relationship is at the top of the list. It truly is with anything, but especially with kids and who they trust. We always try and teach them to trust a police officer or whomever that person is.
I just read 120 pages yesterday of writings from a school shooter that was just released, and every sign was there. I mean, there was just so much leakage and so many signs, but there was no relationship with that kid. Nobody realized that, and it went on. The plot went on for over a year of these writings and what was happening right in front of their face. But yet there were no relationships built, so they never see it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Thank
If
you.
you don't want anyone to come in your school just to stand up post. You know what I mean? I got a gun and I'm standing up post. That will never be good enough. That's never going to get you what you want. They have to build relationships, and with the staff too.
Well, those
Okay.
relationships carry into the community as well.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so, for
That's why
example,
we get
you
so
learn
many
all of this about what to do in a school, but you also learn about what you do outside of school and how do you handle something.
that's what I was just thinking, Jen. This will have reaches far beyond just the school
Mhm.
district itself.
Right.
Indiana, and I go back to Indiana, but they do a lot of things right. They have built contractually an agreement with their local borough police to provide certain securities in and out of their building through the day. And wow, what a relationship. I mean, not only are these kids now protected by uniformed officers who know how to respond to a crisis, but they're learning the things about out in the street too. These officers are coming in with their police dogs and the kids love them and they're teaching. You can't beat that relationship. You know, bringing police officers and former police officers into a school district and letting them be part of your environment is a great thing when it comes time in a crisis. So yeah, I love it. And unfortunately, I still consult for schools that have no safety and security, armed security. And it scares me, to be honest. I mean, we can do our best and implement everything we can, but at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, guns stop guns. And so we need an immediate response to that to save lives. So kudos to you for thinking.
So,
of it.
Bubba, when you were meeting with Jamie Hartline and those folks.
Yes.
And a good, nice young man, by the way. And are they doing something as a group of schools, or just are they gonna go individually with Penn Cambria and Portage? And
Yeah, so we were just speaking, before we came to the meeting, I came from a breakfast this morning with 4 other superintendents from, the superintendent from Portage, Penn Cambria, Black Lake Valley, and Conemaugh Valley, who I consult for, all those schools. And what we're doing is, we are at a point where we are building a reunification plan. And after a crisis, after our worst day where people have guns and knives and bombs, and we have to get kids out of here and staff out of here. Are there people, I didn't mean to turn my back.
That's all right, you're okay.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Okay, I just realized that, I'm like, that was your thing, but, now we're making plans for how to reunify all these kids with their families, how to reunify the staffs whose cars will not leave the parking lot because it's part of the crime scene now. How do we get their loved ones to them? They've been traumatized too. So what we're doing is, in our reunification plan, is all 4 of those schools are coming together to partner with reunification, and we're building teams at each school. So for instance, if I'm Portage and Justin's Conemaugh Valley, if something happens at Portage, Conemaugh Valley's team is coming to our reunification site to help us.
That is great.
Because we're going to send our
Yeah,
own people.
dairy.
A lot of schools build a
Absolutely.
reunification plan and they use their own people to
Yep.
go in the aftermath to reunify.
Yeah.
How can you
Yep.
do that when they've just been traumatized?
But yeah, exactly.
They just were, they
They need help.
Yeah, they need help.
Yeah.
So how can we look at them and give them a job description? We can't. So what happens is, when you count on your own people to do that, at your own place following the crisis, nobody shows up at reunification because they can't. But if a school who wasn't, or wasn't part of that, they now come help you, and by the time you get there, they're all seated and they're in place ready to do reunification. And the healing begins then. So yeah, we just built that. We've done that with Wimber and Forestfield. Those 2 schools I trained both of them. They both come together for reunification at one site. They both use the same site. We build the same plans to help each other in time while we're still.
This is what I've been hammered over the last several years of my life, after being in the military and on the railroad, which changed for security on 9/11.
Yes, sir.
Things have changed, and what we call, what you're really summarizing is situational awareness. And that whole system that you're talking about, again, back to systems, is exactly, in my opinion, what we need, as unfortunately what we need.
Yeah.
We had to-
myself.
Yeah, we had to do a whole lot of things on the railroad because of all the crazy stuff that goes on.
Here's what I know, and in reference to what you're saying in the military and the railroad, I know this to be a fact. When you have a plan, you have a plan, you have a foundation. Whatever obstacles we have to overcome, it's easier when we have a plan. Try to overcome chaos with more chaos when you don't have any kind of plan. It just becomes more chaos.
Yeah.
So build a plan, it's site specific, and then whatever roadblocks come our way, we at least have a plan to build off of.
The 5 Ps, proper planning prevents poor performance. Right.
So if the other schools in our area don't want to participate, we would have to find people to fill that unification team, right?
Yeah, so if you did have partner schools, but you do have other schools, right? How many different schools do you guys have? 4. So what you could do is take from other schools if you had to. One of the reasons you partner in reunification is for legal ramification also, for civil litigation. What I mean by that is this. If your superintendent says this, all right, everybody at this table, you all are Ligonier Valley, and in following a crisis, I want you all to show up in this room and perform a task. And the public's gonna come in and you're gonna tell them what to do after a crisis. When the public walks through that door, they're not happy with it. They're not on your side, right?
Yeah.
Something bad happened and they wanna know who's to blame, and rightfully so. So they're gonna come in here and they're gonna begin to ask questions because they know you, they're from the neighborhood. Is it true that little Susie Smith lost her life in room 102 and because the door was open? Whatever comes out of your mouth, if you were on scene, is admissible in a court. In civil litigation and criminal litigation, right? But if you bring people from the outside, another school district who have nothing to do with what happened that day or have any answers, there's nothing that can be said at those tables that hurt anyone. If I was involved in the shooting at the elementary school and you used me in reunification, 1, you shouldn't do that to me, right? I was just traumatized. And 2, whatever I do that day is admissible in court. Whatever I say to my neighbor, my friend, my whatever, is now admissible in court. Not that you're doing anything wrong, you're hiding something.
Right.
It's court. We've got to make sure that we're protecting everyone involved too. You know what I mean? So.
You know, and that goes to the point of when there's an incident, and as a board member, people say, what happened?
Yeah,
You don't say anything because you don't know.
exactly.
You don't have the facts, and people come, you know, when was it? 2 years ago, we had three lockdowns at the high school. I
Last
believe.
year, that was last year.
Was that just last
That
year?
was just
I don't
last year.
remember.
Yeah.
They go so fast.
There
But
was
people
last
wanna
year.
know, and they wanna know, and they think you know, and you have to be so careful
this
what
is
you
not-
say.
Real life experience, and other than Irma and Mary, nobody else was part of the board then, but we did have an experience where there was a bomb threat and it was taken very seriously and they had to evacuate I mean, and it was crazy because we had somewhat of a plan, but it was a lot of chaos.
Well, there has to be a changing plan too, because every day is different.
Right, I understand
yeah,
that, but I'm just
yeah.
using that as an
Yeah,
example. We
yeah.
just really weren't prepared for that, and
Mm.
all of our local officials did a great job. It's just trying to get it all going was really
I
chaotic.
know our schools, and I say this in general throughout the United States where I go, where schools fail, and I don't wanna say fail, but lack the ability to perform is in the aftermath of a crisis. See, we're okay at proactive, we put all these educational things in place, we're actually okay today, a lot of us, when it actually happens.
Mhm.
We have a response, we run, hide, fight, whatever it may be, but in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath, when things are crazy, that's when schools usually don't have a plan.
Well, that's what happened. We had kids at the Y
You're
and
there.
different places, and their parents didn't know where they were. And
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
you know, wasn't a fault, but it was just, we weren't really
And it
ready
was
for that part.
Well,
The reunification thing.
Yeah, and part of the big thing is, you know, parents were not confident
Sure.
that the school district had a plan and their kids were okay, right? And that's where we need to get to, is that they know that whenever there's a situation that happens, we are so trained, we know what we're doing. Parents just stay at home, stay out of it, they're okay. We're taking care of it.
Yeah,
Never
I think
happened.
that was kind
Will
of
never
like-
happen.
Well, I don't know, I would.
That was kind of like, you know, when I thought of Bubba, cause I know what he did at Indiana. We get that report back from Rich Mader, and I, you know, just asking questions like who we consult with, and it's like, well, Maria's our safety coordinator, and I'm like, Maria's good.
Yeah.
But Maria's doesn't have the level of expertise necessary to really map out, and it's not any fault of hers, she's a
No.
great principal.
Yeah,
She's
that's not her thing.
She's
Yeah.
not a former police officer, she doesn't have that background that's necessary to provide the expertise that we need.
You know, Bob, I do have a question. When there's a crisis in the school and whatever's going on, and maybe they don't know, we have all these kids that have a cell phone. How do you address that issue? And they're all calling their
Great
parents.
for you, Arma.
Yeah.
That's
And that's a biggie.
And it is, so here's how I would answer that. We just had this situation, so for the last week, I have been on the phone 2 to 3 times a day with the superintendent of Conwell Valley, Shane Hastad, who's a very nice speaker. Very educated, very good superintendent. I don't know if you've heard of the news, but 6 kids saran wrapped the school. The police came at 4:30 in the morning, found them inside, took them into custody, arrested them, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you heard all that. Well, you can imagine what the last week has been. They're being charged with felonies. You're ruining these kids' lives. Now they can't graduate. Now they can't walk. I mean, it's just one thing after another. And Shane, who works very hard at that school, we sat down and I said, listen, Shane, there are some things you'll never control. You just can't. You can build an environment. You can let your community know, here's who we are and what we've trained on and what we stand for and we hang our hat on. But they're gonna form their own opinions. But let them, be based on that you do know what you're doing. However, it's gonna happen. And that's okay. The community has the right to do that. And they have the right to question. And they have the right to have concerns. They should. But I also told Shane this. You're never with social media today, you're never gonna control certain chat groups. And that's okay. You're not gonna jump in and give your advice on a chat group. You should have an official social media site that you disseminate what you want them to know. And for the people that want to hear it firsthand from your school, they'll go to that site for that information. The people that don't want to hear that and hear it from the neighborhood gossip, they'll go to the Facebook page. And that's okay. That's okay.
Can't change it.
And kids with cell phones, we're never gonna stop. This is their environment. This is what they've grown up doing, right? I had a pager and thought I was cool once, right? Somebody's gonna call me. Right? So, yeah. But now they have instant communication, and there are pros and cons to that. There are pros and cons to having instant communication with their parents, with their loved ones, with other people. There are kids that have had their cell phone who have made the first initial calls to 911 when there's been shooters in the school.
Yeah, so
They're
that's a
pretty
point.
bad,
Yeah, good.
right? So we don't always want to think that a kid with a cell phone is a bad thing. Sometimes that saves lives too. What we've got to do is build good plans
And
regardless of what's
efficient
being said on the cell phone,
Yeah.
right? And then be able to say, now, what people don't understand is this. In a time of a real crisis at your school, if there's a bomb, a knife, a shooting, and all these first responders are coming to your school because people are hurt or killed or injured, whatever it may be, the cell phones that everybody picks up every day and communicates with, they're not going to be available to them. You see, when first responders come to your school and they're all in fire and police and EMS and all that, they bombard the cell towers with all their communication, their radio talk and all that, which means your cell phone that you count on is rendered almost useless in a time of a crisis. You won't have the bars that you have right now because the first responders get first priority on our cell phone towers. These kids and mothers and dads that think they're going to call each other, call me when there's trouble. It doesn't really like that all the time. They don't have that kind of cell service.
We have that happen on Fort Ligonier days. Try to get a phone
Try to
call
get a
out.
phone call out.
Right, it's
Yeah.
not gonna happen.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You see, people call anyone. You're not getting on the phone. But see, people rely on us in some plans. Some schools use their cell phones as a plan of communication, and I go, stop. It's not going to work. And or kids who we tell where to run to when we allow, we encourage them to run outside to a rally point if something bad's in the school. We say, run to the rally point. I don't care if you're a senior, run to the rally point so we can get you to reunification, so we can reach out through the local media to tell your parents where you are. But they'll go, oh no, I'm running home. But you can run home, but here's what happens. You're going to be home trying to call your mom and dad to tell them you're okay, but no, there's not going to be any service. They can't call you, and now mom and dad are running around terrified
find you.
that
Where are
they
you?
can't find you. You got to know what's reality in a time of a crisis.
And maybe kids need to understand that too,
Yeah,
or whomever.
yeah, and I that's
And us too, somebody's calling us, oh, we can't get our kid. Well, the reason why is there's no bars.
mobile radios are the way to communicate with schools. And
I was just gonna ask that.
mobile radios.
So like handheld,
Absolutely.
that all stays.
All that has to be
Isn't that what we have
incorporated in
here?
your outdoor plans. Can we communicate on
We have
radios?
them in each classroom.
Okay.
Motorola to be exact.
Yeah. And then you test it. Where's my reunification site? Where's my emergency operations center? Where's the scene? Does my radios work in all those scenes? And you test them before you ever do it. Because that's how you're going to communicate. In the time following an incident, that's how you'll communicate.
I had a parent tell me that they would be able to hear from afar away, and I said, that's impossible.
Hear what?
Hear our conversations, like if there were to be an incident.
You can pick up on.
Yeah, and I don't think that's accurate, is
Yeah, I
it?
mean, megahertz is funny. I mean, sometimes, we even as police officers, we put all these protective things in place when you're first responders to military to make sure people don't hear, it picks up on certain stuff. But that's, to be honest, if that's what they're waiting for, if they're all waiting for that, that's what it is.
Well,
But they can pick that up.
right, because when they're talking on their radios,
And they can.
we could listen to it on our
Yeah.
apps.
You pick up those truckers, a couple highways over, yeah, it happens, it depends on the megahertz and what's being disseminated and how it's protected, but that's okay too, the key. Here is the key to safety and security in schools. Know what to do before it ever happens, know what you're doing when it happens, and know what to do after it happens. Before, the during, and the after. If you know those three phases, if you have plans for those three phases, you have a real plan. Now anything can happen, you can make decisions based on what's happened. When we were in that reunification meeting this morning, one of the things we talked about were this. You take all these kids that need reunified after possibly a shooting, and you put them into we were talking about the auditorium at Highlands Community College. And I said, hey, we have to make sure there's bins of clothes stored at Highlands. And one of the superintendents said, bins of clothes, why? And I said, because if something tragic happens at a school where a gun's involved or a knife's involved, things happen. There have been reunification sites, and we know this because it's part of this case study, where a little 10-year-old boy sat in the auditorium waiting to be picked up by his parents for 2 hours. And he sat there the whole time, never causing a problem, but he sat there with blood all over his shirt because his classmate was stabbed next to him.
Oh, my.
And they didn't have the resources to take that little boy and go, come here, and put a new shirt on, so he could sit there without that. Those are the things that you learn through experience, though. That you know at a reunification site, that's what we have to do. And I know that's a lot, but when you plan that way, we have the answers for those things.
So there would be a cost for the other schools to do that with Ligonier Valley if we chose to do that. They would have a cost as well for being part of our unification team, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's, if all they're doing is joining for reunification, it's really minimal. I mean, that's all. they're
That was why I was asking, because then you're asking other schools
doing.
to
Yeah, I mean, it's
chip
very
in.
minimal. And the majority of the safety and security stuff, when you do this the right way, like 3/4 of the schools, if not more than that, that pay me and pay for my service, now it's getting it through grants.
Mhm.
We're writing grants together, we're getting all that every single year. It's written right in, I mean, and then it just becomes. the
That's a
same thing
good
every
point,
time.
yeah. And I'm not trying to be critical of other schools, but we're talking about money, so.
Absolutely, I agree 100%.
Mhm.
And I know that I've been in front of a lot of school boards and I understand that we have to listen, the money's the money. You know what I mean? I understand that completely, you know, but you're,
Are we gonna do this?
before you
Well,
start
I'm gonna get there.
reunifying with other schools, you gotta make sure your school has the right plan.
Okay, and I know Justin has probably mentioned this, but it escapes my brain right now. So what is our yearly cost on this?
So if you're talking full consultation with my company, what I have to do, and I'm just throwing this out and I shouldn't, but my wife yells at me, she's the one who does this, and I get in trouble. It is somewhere between 15 and 18, depending on how many schools, you know what I mean, and locations, all that kind of stuff. I would imagine, yeah, it's right between 15 and 18. But my wife sits down and does that, okay, this location.
Right,
and
I get
scale
that,
and
we
all
get that,
stuff,
yeah, that's.
You gotta each school and do all the drills and.
Oh, so she's the logistics.
She did absolutely.
Okay,
But you're
so
saying that cost for all 4 schools, right?
That's for everyone.
that's.
Yeah, no, that's for everyone.
Okay,
Okay.
Irma,
Nurture. And I can tell you this, and by all means, you can look it up, call, find out. I am absolutely 3 to 4 times cheaper than any other consultant.
Is it 1,500 or 15,000?
50,000.
Okay, I just wanted to know how many zeros, there is a difference.
Okay, Jen, yes, no, move it to
Absolutely.
Irma. No, Gary, sorry, yes, okay, your go. Move it to out, the committee.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bubba.
Thank you.
Bubba, question, is this to do this study to start with or the ongoing per year or whatever?
That's for the year.
I'm sorry?
The 15 to 18,000, that's your
that's what-
initial cost and then the annual is.
Oh, no, the annual's that.
That's
the
it.
school year.
That's the full cost.
Yeah, that's.
Every
that's
school
the
year.
cost.
Okay,
Yes, thank you, appreciate you too, thank you so much. Yeah, that's the whole school year's consultation.
okay.
Yep. And consultation means this, so you know, there's a proposal that says, you know, this. There'll never be enough paper for us to write down
Can I
what a,
for Donnie?
you know what I mean?
Gary.
Yeah, the schools call me for absolutely anything that goes wrong with their safety and security, so, and we're available 24/7,
Okay.
absolutely. All right, well, thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Gary, can I have one for Dawn?
Oh, that one's blank. Have a great day.
Do you have the next one for Dawn?
We have one for Dr. D.
Huh?
Does Dr. D need one?
Oh,
He knows.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so, you know, just to kind of recap on Bubba was, he was absolutely phenomenal. You can, you know, almost tell from his presentations now, when he presents to teachers, they pick up on it, cause he's engaging.
Yes.
He'll do student presentations. Kids
Which is
love him.
important,
Yeah,
yeah.
kids love him, teachers love him.
He's very commanding.
Yeah.
does he do anything with Indiana University?
I don't think so, but I know he does some like corporation type things, like I know he does like Crayola factory, some other places, mostly schools.
I think kids would love learning how to jump out a window.
No, I'm still, really, yeah, I know, they would love that, wouldn't they?
They all get to practice that.
I know I have a few grandkids who would
Yeah.
enjoy that, yeah.
Hey, my mom had to learn
Yeah,
about working
But
for
we
the
had,
state.
in Indiana, he was the driving force, we had a safety coordinator who was hired from the district that we had monthly meetings, but it was like, we didn't really move. He kept us moving because his effort was on that, like everyone else's that's working in the school was.
Right.
Their effort
Yeah,
was
somebody
on
has to be the drive.
things.
Yeah, somebody has to be the driver. Excellent.
All right, so item number 6, these next two are very quick, and then Janine has a software list. So I put this in here, so I've been getting, and I know Cindy, I think you have, I know Dawn has for sure, I don't know how many of other. So at one point, the school district was doing mass customized learning, and there's some teachers that reach out to me and said, hey, no one ever really told us that mass customized learning was not a thing anymore. And there's, along with mass customized learning came these progressions, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the progressions or not.
Oh, yeah.
But the progressions were based upon more teachers, not even so much the standards. So like, my take on it was,
Disaster.
well, we should be driven by the PA standards because the PA standards are ultimately what we're measured on. PSSA measures us on standards. Standards should be the driving force. So I put this letter together. I felt like we need to get something out to staff to let them know, hey, we're, building out a curriculum cycle. We're, we're abandoning the philosophy of mass customized learning and moving more towards research-based, data-focused curriculum. So if you guys are okay with it, I know you might not have read the whole thing now. If you have any issues with the letter, just reach out and let me know.
Well, and it's in writing, the information, which is really good.
Yeah, I'm planning on getting this out before teachers leave for the summer, probably some point next. Early.
So because the verbiage is not what I'm used to, if you say to them, we're not doing personalized, customized learning, do they understand that they have to teach out of what we give them and they're not allowed to go out and just pull what they want in?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're gonna make that, because I know.
That's what I was trying to ask
Like
before.
Nicole mentioned at the last meeting she was here, we had been doing HMH reading. We had been doing it for 6 years,
Yeah.
but not really doing it.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of the year, we've talked with principals and we had our MTSS meeting. I made clear to the principals that this isn't an all, this is
This is
not.
not-
option.
Right,
Like,
this
we're
is what you
investing-
teach with, this is what the board's approved,
Yeah,
this is what you go.
community taxpayers, we've invested
Yeah.
money into this program, we need to implement it.
And we've talked about this for months upstairs.
Yeah.
Sure.
Between us, and we felt like we needed to get something out.
I
Mhm.
totally agree.
Official.
It
Absolutely.
was officially from the administration.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
For support to move past, time to move past.
Yeah. So Jen?
Yes.
So
Okay, so letter?
yeah, so she was talking about grades.
Gary, are you
So
okay with
on
that
the
letter?
report cards,
Are you okay with
there
the
were
letter?
the progressions that were listed, so those would go away, and it would just be grade-based report cards as opposed to their big.
A basic
Thank you.
old-fashioned report card.
Yeah, and I've talked with parents on that
They
too.
hate
I've
that progression
talked
thing.
with probably
And one.
all of our staff, pretty much all of our staff, and then I've talked with a lot of parents that are like, we don't even understand what's
They
progression.
do not like that.
General, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you're good.
All right, so
Katie.
so number 7 is, I just wanted to give you guys an update.
Justin.
I'm gonna work with,
I'm sorry, just that is kindergarten through 12, not, we're not splitting out elementary, right? That's the whole way through?
it's through the elementary, middle school didn't have that, and high school didn't have the progression on there.
Right, but
Yeah, they-
elementary did, so that,
Yeah, all elementary.
so everything will be the
Yeah,
same.
talk with
Okay.
staff is all good with it. That was, when you can get your low hanging fruit and get a win, that was a huge win, because teachers were like,
Yeah.
we never wanted this on here again.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
And it was
No, they
hard.
didn't.
And I don't know that there was, honestly, we did that survey, I did a survey, the Google form survey to teachers that just said, hey, what is your opinion on this? There was not one single person that said we want that.
Well, and because they're taking the heat from the parents
Yeah.
wanna know, where is my kid? And, the teachers didn't have the data to say, yes, it's this, because we weren't using it.
Yeah, that survey that we sent out was very telling for the staff, like it told us exactly what we needed to hear.
Mhm. Good.
So
So,
that'd be
so
good.
the overall consensus is teachers didn't like what was happening before.
No.
They do like now what we're doing with curriculum, with this new turnaround, everything. They
I
like
think
it.
so, I mean, we'll have, I mean, I don't have any doubts that no matter what you do, there's always gonna be someone that's like, I kind of wish we would've did something different, but the majority, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if this passes the board, the rest of the board, would this be implemented for the new school year coming
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
Okay.
And then, the last item on there is code of conduct. I just want to give you guys an update. I'm gonna be working with the principals to, shore up some things on the code of conduct. We're gonna look at, how we level up offenses and then, what happens based upon those offenses. Because the way it's written right now, illicit by behavior, and then just seems like it's discretionary.
It is
Yep.
very
It needs to be.
Favoritism, don't get me
I was
started.
gonna say,
Needs to be
yeah.
so I think there
Yeah.
still needs to be discretion, but I think there almost needs to be a little more.
There needs to
guidance.
be, right.
Yeah.
So is this a policy number or is this the code of conduct in the books, the handbooks?
It's in both.
Yeah, both.
So the policy.
Do you know what
says-
policy number it is?
I don't.
No, okay, I'll look it up, that's all right.
But, what the principal's using is based out of the handbook.
Yeah.
Okay, because that was the one thing that when Dawn and I had met with Maria,
Mhm.
and she, we talked about the tier, the discipline, the tiered thing, that it would be that, so we would have to mold the policy to use the verbiage,
Yeah.
more exact that, this is what we're gonna do, but see the handbook for each
Yeah.
school for the tiered discipline. Is
Yeah.
that what you're talking
And
about here?
The handbook would more or less be like an administrative regulation that accompanies the policy.
Okay,
Well,
But,
didn't they come out of numerous policies into the code of conduct?
yeah.
So-
That was always my understanding. It came out of many policies. As in, they were the umbrella for what the code of conduct then was.
great.
So it would be the same for each building, or would each building?
Probably
have
be
its
some
own?
variance between buildings.
Probably be-
You would have to, yeah,
Right.
you'd have to have variance just because of the age of kids. and
Right,
All
right.
that.
Cause that, I think
But you
we
still
have,
have the same policy.
And you almost
Yeah,
don't wanna be
based on
too
something, yeah.
rigid,
No,
like, you
you
don't wanna
don't.
be so prescriptive
Mhm.
that handcuffs a principal.
But it's a guideline.
But you almost, you should be taking into consideration some things, like, if a student has an intellectual disability,
Right.
that's different than if it was, a kid with,
Right.
normal functioning.
You know what, Justin, is there and for years, I've thought that this was too long, too difficult for parents or kids or anybody else to understand. Can that be reduced in the number of pages
I totally agree.
from 20 pages to 5
make like-
pages?
And let's make a
Yeah.
chart. If
Yeah,
we're
I
gonna
mean,
chart,
it's too big.
Yeah, so,
Understand.
so what we'll do is I'm meeting with them on, June
June
16th,
16th.
once things die down a
Yeah.
little bit, from the school
I
year.
mean, it needs to be reusable.
But I'd like to, get if we have an education committee meeting in July, I'd like to, or even early August, if we could get something approved before the school year.
So they
starts,
Oh,
have,
that'd be
absolutely.
Great,
Yeah,
but, as we kind of develop something on the 16th, I'll share it out with the board, get your opinions, then when we meet again, we'll just kind of review.
this is long overdue.
right, and
Very- right.
I like the
Totally.
chart thing too, Cindy, because
charts, yep.
the parents get the manual as well, and if the parent can say, look, this is what's gonna happen if you do this, instead of, well, my kid's a football player, or whatever, just as a general example, not to pick someone.
It just needs to be easier to understand.
Yes, it does.
Basically, what I think everybody's saying here is, as long as the parents know about all this, I mean.
Yeah.
There has been, for a while, a lack of communication from the staff and the parent, or the teachers with the parents. Now, a lot of that is, some parents just, are so busy, they got 18 million things going on. But is there guys have a plan or a system to try to get out to the parents more? Or is there something that you have an idea what
Yeah,
that?
there's some, I don't know what you had in Franklin region, but we had a communications plan that went through like internally, like here's what happens through the district, we had, as part of that, there was the chain of command that happened, and then, but that's something we could think about too, is, what does our communication structure look like? It's a great point.
One of the first things I sent to you when I first came on board was the idea of systems. And one of the systems I talked about is putting together a parent advisory committee where board members pick a
Right.
parent, administrators
Yes,
And
you did.
monthly, so right now, bi-monthly, we're meeting with the administrative team. Monthly, we're meeting with the union. And monthly, you would meet with his parents, the PTO presidents. And that's the great way word of mouth start getting out. You can send stuff out on your website and all that, but not everyone follows that.
Right.
You also have to have word of mouth, and you could also do things on the auto system if you had to. But that committee would be really important committee for the school district.
If we could add to the code of conduct, um, additions, changes to the dress code, because some students aren't adhering and it's okay, and some students aren't. You know what I mean? There's a lot of leeway given, I think especially in the middle school and high school. So a lot of parents don't like that either. And there's just not a lot of guidance for the staff to handle what's acceptable, what's not. And I think we need to be a little more specific and follow through if somebody, does violate that code of conduct. Because it's a distraction for students and staff when there's an issue.
Yeah, look, that's,
Okay.
and then Janine, you have the last one.
All right, I'm gonna make mine short and sweet. I mentioned this. The last educational programs committee. So this is that district software list that I'm gonna ask for the board's approval on, and basically parents will have to sign off on allowing their children to utilize these softwares. And it's gonna be more an overview of them. And then I have to work on getting a process in place. I had a meeting with tech directors in the county, and we're all in like the same boat, trying to navigate how we get our staff sort of under control on what they're using digitally in their classrooms, because they can go out and sign up for sites. Nobody really wants to know that that's happening. So we have to get a system in place for approving these things, and that on the software list, and I'll have Dawn share it once I have it.
Okay, so you didn't give it to us yet.
No,
Okay.
I'll have her put it in your board.
Docs folder.
Yeah,
This all,
and then it'll be part of enrollment. When a new student comes in, it'll be part of that package, but it'll also be on the start of the year stuff. Now, the attorney that we joined what's called Tech Pool, and he does presentations with I do, like, all the tech directors. And he said that he focused on the 12 and under because of COCO law. And that's who you really target, but I'm just doing it across the board. Just to have that all covered. And then to sort of spin off of this is more thinking long-term and what's coming in the future is AI. Policies surrounding AI, how we want to handle that. But we had a middle school teacher do a lesson. We can't put our head in the sand on it. It's there. We can't do that. We can't say nobody's allowed to use it. We have to educate the kids on how to use it, what it is. And that type of thing. But we have to develop a policy surrounding it. It's hard because it's ever changing. So you're it's a moving target.
is this tying in? I understand, maybe I'm wrong, that we're coming out with, we're gonna start using Chromebooks. Have you heard that? You know about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all changing, and the iPads are going out, or whatever they call them. So all that's.
So the one-to-one devices that are being used in the middle school currently are iPads. Those are being phased out, and the kids will be getting Chromebooks, because we also have to take into account that their state testing that happens in the spring is now going to be online. So the devices are going to be more at the forefront of making sure they're updated and good for those tests.
I know Mr. Story was talking about that. Sorry, Jen.
No, I don't want to interrupt your thought. If a parent elects not to allow their child to be on certain sites, how will that come into play if that's part of a lesson? Would it be paper and pencil?
Like certain sites, this is gonna be like, this is what we use, this is what we approve. Are you good? Yes, no type thing.
Mhm.
So this, there's Google sign on, it's the stuff that comes packaged with the curriculum. Because there's a lot of resources, so it would make it difficult if they don't want those things.
Mhm.
But if we're talking AI sites and that type of thing, I'll go back to the lesson that I was talking about in the middle school. We had a teacher do a lesson surrounding AI in the middle school. So we sent them parent permission, and there were some that didn't turn it back. Everyone who did was yes. But those kids had to do it alternatively. They may have watched rather than interacted. So they get the same thing, just not the same experience.
Okay. Can we get that lesson? I don't know how to use AI. Can we get that lesson too?
I can show you, I use it all the time. It's a good tool.
Yeah.
That's gonna have those.
Analyzing it. So,
But
you know, you
I'm
have
very false.
to
We are
really
citizens.
is
I don't want it.
and
My
what
friends
to,
with
you
AI,
know,
they
how
got
AI
it
provides the
substitute
fairy
what
tale.
we're learning.
And
They should not be using AI.
Does
to
that
write
come in
composition
with
or
chat
resume.
GPT and all
Yeah.
that? Because
You know.
I understand there's a
So
lot of
that's my
problems
only-
with homework and things like that where
But it is
chat
great for
GPT comes into play.
Teachers have it in their syllabus.
Mhm.
A lot of them at the high school level, especially on, you know. Can you stop it? I mean, can you stop a kid from writing on a paper and looking at it during their test?
Right, well,
You know, you can catch them. You
Well,
can't stop them from
and the
doing
thing
it.
is, we're hindering them if we don't teach them the right way to do it because they have to know for the
Yes.
real world
Yes.
outside of school walls.
Presentation to staff, next week on AI. He has done one, a couple years ago at the start of the year.
Mhm.
So he's gonna do another one next week surrounding AI. And he shared with me an article that you know, it's a very long article, and he's like, I didn't know either, but it was very interesting in terms of, it was an outlook for the jobs and what's gonna be available and what they're looking for. The you
In the
know,
future.
employers. And it would be shocking to know that like the actual writing skills and that type of thing were lower than, you know,
You,
problem
computer
solving
schools, yeah, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And because AI can, if you're not a strong writer, you get your basis, you put it in there and say, make this more professional, or and then you look over it and you read it. And my son, who's in college for software engineering, he uses it to help him troubleshoot when he's stuck on something that with the coding. You know, so I mean, it's out there, it's a tool. It's-
Yeah, I know, I definitely use it to get a professional, more professional way of saying this.
Yes,
You know, this
like
is,
you
but
have
we
to-
don't, but I think, and I was saying this to Dr. D, you know, that is more secondary level, high school level, right, for us adults. But you can't let AI take the place of base route learning. You just can't. They have to learn that, you know.
have the basic skills, but
Yeah.
to say that those kids aren't exposed to AI in the elementary school, they 100% are.
Yeah.
They're exposed.
And I did AI last night, how could I lose weight? It's not working. AI is not helping. Yeah, it's not over.
Janine, is this something that we've always done the software list, or is this new?
No,
Something
this
we're
is-
putting- This, okay.
This is something through mandates from the state, like there may be, but
I
this
get
is the privacy policy.
See, okay,
But it's actually more for the companies
right.
to do, but as a district, it's more covering our bases that we're sharing with the parents. These are the softwares that we use.
Right.
And these are the privacy policies and how they're gonna be using information. So it's more on, privacy and data privacy than more than anything, this piece of it, like but it's just, you know.
Okay,
best
so
practice.
this Justin's question probably goes more to you in conjunction with her, but relating back to what Jennifer said. If a parent has something on that list and they're like, nope, not doing it. Do we have, on our 105.2, exemption from learning experiences, can they use that form? Do they fill that out so that we know that, yeah, the software site or whatever it is, that they're not using that. They're not allowed this. I know it makes, a little bit harder for the teacher, but we need a way for the parents to be able to say, look, I don't want this whole package. There are parts of this that I don't like, that I want my child exempted from. So would that fall under our 105.12, whatever it is, or,
I think so, yeah.
okay,
And if a parent doesn't respond, are we considering that a yes or a no?
I'd say that's most of, I would say
A
most
no?
of everything is passive consent, so yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it
yeah, I
would be,
think that
okay.
would be-
Yeah.
So no
Passive
response would
consent.
be a yes,
Yeah,
okay.
no response.
Because if they decided to change, they would just tell us no. Janine, is there any? I don't want to use the word restriction, but say you're using Google and you say yes. Are there certain limitations to what would the extent of what they could be exposed to? Like they wouldn't be exposed to porn or things like that.
No.
That's what I'm saying. There would be certain
No.
barriers.
Content filter on our internet.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah,
Okay.
content filter to block
Okay, good.
Yeah. that kind of stuff.
Bye, Irma.
okay.
She,
All right,
Done.
Justin,
That's
anything
it.
else?
That's all I have.
All righty, we'll conclude this meeting then at 10:54. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
great meeting.
Great